You're listening to a Roddenberry podcast.
This episode of Mission Log is brought to you by listeners like you, supporters on Patreon. Join today at patreon.com/missionlog.
Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast, episode 406, The Reckoning.
Welcome into another episode of Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. I'm John Champion.
And I'm Norman Lau. Each week on Mission Log, we study the ancient texts, translating them for a new audience, which basically means we watch Star Trek one episode at a time and then talk about it, seeing if the prophets left us some nuggets of wisdom along the way.
This week, The Reckoning. I reckon it's the one where there's a reckoning. But not just any reckoning, it's the reckoning. So get ready for that.
Well, I reckon so. So before we get into all that, I reckon I'll tell everyone how to reach us. Mission Log is a conversation about Star Trek, and that's why we want to hear from you. Use Mission Log Pod to give us a like and a share on Facebook and Twitter. Then follow and rate us at Apple Podcasts to help others find the show. You can call us on Skype at Mission Log Pod or by dialing 323-522-5641. Send us an email at missionlog@roddenberry.com, and remember, we may use your comments on an upcoming episode of Mission Log. And I reckon now's the time for the trivia with John Champion.
I reckon I'll get right into it. So the story is credited to Harry Worksman and Gabrielle G. Stanton. And here we have a duo who both have their first professional writing credit on this very episode of DS9. It's their only Trek, but they both racked up an impressive number of credits as writers and producers ever since. Shows like Castle, Grey's Anatomy, Time After Time, The Invisible Man. And since they are both part of that extended Star Trek universe of fans and professionals, it's fun that they are both in the movie Free Enterprise, essentially as themselves. We have a teleplay by David Weddle and Bradley Thompson. You know that twosome that we've talked about. We recently covered their story contribution in Inquisition, but here the team of David and Bradley get the teleplay credit only. It was collaborative, though. David and Bradley had already been kicking around a similar idea, and they were unaware of the pitch from Harry and Gabrielle. So this was the compromise, to buy the pitch and then assign it to the writers who were already working on the idea. Makes sense. The episode was directed by Jesus Salvador Trevino, and this is the last of the 3 episodes Jesus contributed on DS9. Previously, we talked about his directorial work on The Begotten and Sons and Daughters, and we'll catch him again on Voyager. And just a couple of fun story notes here. One of the original drafts had Kira and Kai Winn as the two possessed bodies fighting it out and fighting for much longer than the sequence that we have here. It was deemed entirely too expensive and too time-consuming, so after the change was made to have Jake in the battle, the effect sequences were toned down and minimized a bit. And let's look at our guest stars. We're pretty much focused on our own crew here, with the notable exception of Louise Fletcher back as Kai Winn. And early on, we meet Coral, something of a Bajoran monk, played by James Green. Talk about an extraordinary career. James made it all the way from starring on Broadway with Olivia de Havilland in Romeo and Juliet to playing Councilman Milden on Parks and Rec. And seriously, go look that up. He was on 18 episodes of that show and hilarious in all of them. You may even remember him as Uncle Moudry in Alien Nation. He also turns up in feature films like Road to Perdition and Patch Adams. This isn't our first time seeing him on Trek either. He was in one of my favorite TNG episodes, Who Watches the Watchers, and he will be back briefly in an episode of Voyager. Now, he passed away in 2018 at the age of 91, and in addition to his extensive career on stage and on screen, He also published a memoir called A View from the Wings in 2016.
Oh great, Kai Winn's in this one. I wonder if she's started hiring a monk to follow her around with a jam box playing that "Ooh child, things are gonna get easier" song. Spoiler, things are not going to get easier.
Prologue. The briefing today on DS9 is a mixed bag. The Dominion have made some headway toward Vulcan, but they've been pushed back by the Romulans near Benzar. Captain Sisko has other things on his mind, though. He and Jake and Kira will visit Bajor a little later to explore a cave where a mysterious ancient tablet has been found under one of their temples. The part of the ancient inscriptions they can make out spells "Welcome Emissary," and when Sisko gets close to it, he has a vision of the prophets, as the people he's around now, warning him that the reckoning is coming. It will be the end, or the beginning, and when the vision is over, Sisko is thrown against a cave wall. Act 1. Waking up from his vision, Sisko tells the others about the reckoning. Coral, the monk, knows nothing about it, and he can't translate the rest of the tablet. In that case, Sisko will take it with him back to DS9, where he'll ask Dax to work on it, which he does, and Dax isn't exactly confident or thrilled at the prospect, but she'll get going. Not much time passes before DS9 has a special visitor. Oh, hello, Kai Winn. She is not pleased. Well, about anything, really, but this time she's not happy that Sisko took it upon himself to take an ancient religious artifact up to the station without permission. That might be a sensitive topic since, the Cardassians kind of did the same thing. Sisko has a trump card, though. He's the emissary, and he feels like the prophets wanted him to take it, so that gives Kai Winn pause. The prophets have never spoken to her, so she has to take Sisko's word for it. She would never argue with the emissary over such things, except that's a lie. She totally goes over Sisko's head and complains to Starfleet. They tell Sisko he needs to return the tablet, but not until he gets Dax to speed up her work. There could be some valuable information in those inscriptions, and he wants to know what the prophets have in mind for Bajor. What Dax finds isn't exactly encouraging, though. The inscriptions so far read that the reckoning is close at hand, and the prophets will weep, and their sorrow will consume the gateway to the temple, that gateway being Deep Space Nine. Act 2, word gets out fast. Odo, Worf, and Bashir talk over the relative accuracy of Bajoran prophecy, while Quark just laments how business is down. While Bashir thinks it's all just a laughing matter, they're all startled when the station shakes violently. There's a disturbance in the wormhole, another tremble in the station, and even Bashir looks worried. Odo and Kira discuss things over a meal. Well, Kira's meal. Odo doesn't really eat, remember? Kira expresses her need for faith in the prophecies, while Odo wants a more pragmatic answer, though he does say he has faith in her. That instability in the wormhole didn't just shake the station. Kai Winn reports to Captain Sisko that there are geologic and other disturbances on Bajor, all chalked up to the wormhole, and it's her opinion that the root cause is Sisko's stealing of the tablet. She insists that he return it, although he asks for more time with it. She's a step ahead, though, and First Minister Shakar is on her side, demanding its return. So Sisko agrees. He'll send it back in the morning. Oh, but not before Dax can give it another look and just work harder and faster. And now she can work from a hologram anyway. But she has made some progress that one of the inscriptions either means the Bajorans will suffer terribly or eat fruit. Your pick. Kira tries to put things in perspective for Sisko. The Kai's resentment is probably rooted in a good deal of jealousy. Here he is, the outsider as emissary, while she's had this faith her whole life and never had an encounter with the prophets. He says he'll try to keep that in mind. Another disturbance, another rumbling, another passive-aggressive encounter between Kira and Kai Winn. But it's Jake Sisko who is up late this night, confiding in his dad that He's a little worried about this emissary stuff. Like, remember those times he ended up in the infirmary having visions? Yeah, Jake doesn't want to go through seeing that happen to his father anymore. Please? Captain Sisko says he didn't ask for it, and, good talk, son. But Ben can't sleep at night either. He wanders his way into the lab where the stone tablet is being kept, and in frustration at the prophets and their vague needs, he hurls the thing at a wall, cracking it into a million pieces. When he does, both blue and orange glowing mists escape from the shards of broken rock, making their way up and out through the station bulkheads. Act 3. Sisko tries to explain his actions to Odo and Dax. He had an uncontrollable urge. Got a surge, and it's out of control. Yeah. They can't find any evidence of an energy discharge coming from the stone, and yet, right then, DS9's power systems drain and surge a bit. You know who else is discharging some energy? Kai Winn, when she finds out what Captain Sisko did to that ancient artifact. She's furious and can't believe he would do such a thing to spite her. He says he didn't, though. It was the prophets guiding him, and she just needs to have faith, like he does, that he's being guided by them. Still, the situation on Bajor is looking more and more dire, and Kai Winn blames Sisko for it all. Before they can argue the point further, a call comes from Odo that he needs the captain on the promenade right away. There, standing in the doorway of the Bajoran temple, is Major Kira, but not herself, to be sure. There's wind, energy discharge, lightning coming from her hands, and stuff exploding all around her. Kira is possessed by one of the prophets, and she addresses Sisko that this vessel was willing. Now it's time for the reckoning. Act 4. So about this reckoning. Possessed Kira doesn't say too much other than that it's time for the end. Or the beginning. And she's waiting for Kost Imogen, who Kai Winn explains is the evil one, or to put it another way, a Pa-wraith banished from the celestial temple. Or could it be Satan? The prophet, in corporeal form, awaits this evil entity, also in some corporeal form, to fight it out. If the good prophet wins, then it's 1,000 years of peace, a golden age for Bajor. If the other one wins, then not that. And it's all going to go down right here on the promenade of this space station. She thanks Sisko for doing his job, summoning them, and when Kai Winn tries to step in for a little FaceTime with the prophet, it's not happening. The wind machines are turned off, and Kira just stands there like a statue waiting for her enemy to show up. In Ops, Sisko makes the call to abandon the station. This fight is going to take place whether they want it or not, and he has to protect his people. Dax does have an option, though. They could flood the area with chronoton particles, which would drive out the wormhole aliens. They can't stand the stuff. Not enough to kill them, just enough to protect Kira and not make DS9 a total war zone. Sisko refuses, though. This is something that needs to happen, and it's the price they have to pay for asking the prophets to protect Bajor from the invading Dominion fleet. On the way out, Odo assures Worf that Kira wants this. It's part of her faith, even though Worf admits that he doesn't think he could do the same thing for Dax. People are leaving DS9 in droves, except for Kai Winn and a last group of Bajorans offering up prayers until Sisko can convince them otherwise. The Kai is full of faith that the good prophets will win, and just think when that golden age occurs, there will be no need for Kais, or Vedics, or even emissaries. Saving us from another passive-aggressive argument, possessed Kira stirs back to life to announce that the evil one has chosen a vessel, and that vessel is Jake Sisko. Act 5. Lightning, fire, sparks, cue the wind machines. The possessed Kira and Jake stare each other down while aiming blue and orange energy beams at each other. Dax is saying they need to get out of there, but they could activate the chronoton particles. Sisko again refuses. This has to play out, according to him. The prophets will protect Jake because they will. Now everyone else needs to leave. With the last of the personnel leaving, Dax rounds up any stragglers to get to the last ship remaining, but not making the trip is Kai Winn, who sneaks off when Dax is distracted. Cut to the Promenade. Kira, Jake, both possessed, both shooting more energy beams at each other, while everything around them sparks and explodes. But then they both scream out as we see that Kai Winn has activated the chronoton particles, thus ending the supernatural battle. Captain Sisko runs over to Jake, knocked out from the ordeal, just like Major Kira. They'll both survive. It'll take longer for Jake, though, who will need a few days' rest in the infirmary. When Sisko goes to see his son, he's racked with guilt. But Jake says he knows that no matter what, he knew at the time that the Pa-Wraith couldn't be allowed to win, even if he had to die in the process. They embrace. Odo and Kira have a similar reunion. She thanks him for respecting her faith. He says he wouldn't have minded if the prophets had picked someone else. Finally, Kira escorts Kai Winn back to her shuttle, and Winn says she did the right thing by saving Bajor and the station and Sisko's son. Oh yeah? Not so fast. Kira calls her out. What Kai Winn did, she did because she couldn't stand to see an outsider in a display of faith greater than her own. So yeah, Kai Winn has endangered all of them again by stopping the prophets from what they needed to do. And now we have no idea how that will play out for Bajor. The end.
John.
Yes.
My child.
Oh,
so well done. That write-up was so wonderful. I'm surprised you wrote it so succinctly when you could have just gone to Wikipedia, the higher authority, and just copied it for yourself. But it must have been the will of the prophets.
This is how it's going to be, huh? This is it. Yeah, now the skin is crawling up. All right, I'm in for it today. All right, man, let's get going here right off the bat. Hey, we're back to war, but wait, we'll save the war talk. Let's go see some ruins. I do like how we just make that easy and quick transition, and I do like the shout out though to the Vulcans. And we haven't seen a good bin site in a long, long time. I was a little disappointed we didn't get to see one here, but at least they got a shout-out. So a lot of good name and location dropping in that teaser. Bravo.
I also like how they referenced like the Dominion's strategy and their strongholds there in the locations that they've acquired when they talked about Beta Z and the Argolis cluster. Because we've seen that happen. We saw the reference for Beta Z in the Pale Moonlight. The Argolis cluster was even earlier, so I thought that was nice that they have this callback to the progression of their war, so it feels like that there's an actual forward movement going on.
Yeah, indeed. I do have to say, like, it was interesting, that little moment between Kira and Odo, because we are so many more steps now toward Casual Friday Odo. Now, literally just after one episode of them kind of finding each other and deciding to make this happen. So Vic worked well. He did his job. And I do like the way that they're playing it now. It's professional when they are professional, but they have this like playful, relaxed thing when they're with each other. It's a nice contrast, and it just feels very real. I like it.
I think there's something to be said about having actors and characters when they find that moment where they understand this is the motivation with characters. And Renee and Nana as Odo and Kira, when they press their nose prosthetics together,
right.
It was adorable.
Yeah.
I think that was something that both of them really know about their characters. I'm sure that their makeup artists were probably not so excited about that because they probably had to reset their makeup after that. But it was adorbs. It was totes adorbs.
Totes adorbs, man. Now, look, I know that this would ruin the whole premise of the episode, but they just beamed up this 30,000-year-old stone. Like, this monk didn't say, hey, maybe you shouldn't do that. They just like, oh, okay, here, take it. They couldn't just, maybe make a holocopy the exact same way they did before when Ben was spending all that time in the holosuite with that obelisk. And also, while we're at it, they haven't let Bajorans use their technology like maybe a tricorder or library computer up until now. It just seems like could have saved a lot of time. But again, I know that kind of logic would ruin the story.
Right. Well, obviously, the reason why your question, is a question is because of what happens later on. Because he has to have something solid to throw at the bulkhead.
Exactly.
But one of the things that I always look for as someone who's a fan of background scenes, to be honest with you, I wish that there was like a little bit more of kind of like strewn about equipment, like pickaxes or machinery or anything like that would show an active dig site in the process. Because it just like you had these wonderful lights, everything was clean, but it's an active dig site. So I just wanted a little bit more world building in there that they just stopped all of a sudden because they found this particular slab and they said, nope, we have to have the emissary in there. I also kind of wanted Gandalf to show up and say, speak friend and enter, so that the door would open for Sisko, but we never got there.
That would have been nice. Yes.
Oh, Bajoran bats are a thing now, right?
Yeah, apparently they don't bite often.
But do we call them Bajats or Batjorans?
Ooh, Batjorans. I like the sound of Batjorans because that then builds our DS9 Batman 66 crossover that we've been asking for so long. Yeah.
So we got Batjorans and then Ensign Robin, right?
Yeah, right.
Okay. Gotcha.
Exactly. So you opened it with your little. You knew you would get right under my skin with Kai Winn and Sisko's facepalm. That is my facepalm. That
perfect.
When I hear that Kai Winn is coming, she doesn't even have to be on the screen yet. When I hear Kai Winn is here, it's like it happens to me.
I think like you and everyone else in the audience were just like, oh my god,
right?
Really?
Oh no!
How could this day get any worse? Kai Winn's coming on the station. Really?
Just the anxiety goes. Yeah. But so I love, taking, and I'm sure we'll come back to it, taking the stone is what the prophets want, but maybe not exactly, but this is, again, the best just get out of jail free card. You just, why did you take the stone? The prophets wanted it. I didn't hear that. Yeah, but you're not talking to the prophets,
Snap.
Yeah. And look, Kai Winn can have her objections, but the stone does have the emissary's name on it.
Yeah.
So, you got to at least give him credit for that.
Yeah, I mean, if it said, welcome Kai, you're all over it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you're not.
Right, exactly.
You're not the emissary. Sorry. Sorry.
Yeah.
Kai Winn does say there's something that is a little inconsistent with this artifact because Corral said that we've tried and we can't translate it. Kai Winn says that there are scholars on Bajor that can translate it. So, which is it?
Yeah.
Is
Right.
Kai Winn playing at something here, which she usually is, or what's going on? I don't really get that,
Yeah. I mean, look, Prime Directive does not apply here. Just give the people the tricorder, okay? Give somebody down there a tricorder and the internet, okay? Oh, hey, I do love this little bit that Dax says to Sisko, I remember when you used to call them wormhole aliens. Hey, Dax, I'm still here for you, okay? You need that conversation, you talk to me.
I got a whole bit on that later.
Okay, good. And by the way, this was a character choice thing. I did feel like Dax's reaction to the tablet was just a little odd. I mean, like, the thing that I love about Dax is that she shoots from the hip. But even her joking in this episode just feels really out of place, like sarcastically blowing a kiss at Sisko in that moment. That was one of those that I was like, did I actually just see that? And then watching it again, and it still doesn't play right.
See, I did a double take on that too, and I kind of thought it was sweet.
Really?
In a weird way.
Yeah.
Because it was out of character, but I'm just wondering if Terry just threw that in there as an improv. And they just went with it, but it was like characteristically out of place. But that's why I like it. I think.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah.
Oh, here's the thing, though. I've done some study on ancient Bajoran texts, and if there's one thing I have learned, there's a very fine line between suffering and fruit.
Well, it depends on the fruit, now, doesn't it? Yeah.
Well, true. If you do eat some fruits, you will suffer. But it's like feast or famine. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, nice little callback, Major Kira there eating that fruit plate. A very earth-looking fruit. Look, there's some cantaloupe, some orange slices, some grapes. No Hasperat in sight, but she is having that fruit plate.
Well, I mean, I guess Odo could have shape-shifted some Hasperat on the side. Just couldn't be eaten.
Yeah,
It could have been there
right.
just to
You
complement her dish.
Right, exactly. Yeah, just so she doesn't feel alone or, self-conscious about it.
One thing I did notice throughout this entire episode is the actors really understanding the nuances of their characters. And I really loved when Jake showed up worried for his father, and then Avery as Sisko just kind of touches him on the face, gives him that little punch in the arm. I think that's just a nice shorthand that actors acquire over time with other actors. And I do think that it shows that Avery and Sirach had a very special relationship on and off camera.
I agree, although I don't agree that was a little punch on the arm. I was watching that, was like, that would hurt. Of course, I'm very delicate, but, I just like, ow, hey, if we have to do 10 takes of this, don't do that, okay?
So I know that there's a point to why Sisko destroyed the artifact. That's obviously a plot point. But when you're watching this for the first time in real time,
yeah,
when he goes to the artifact, grapples with it philosophically in a way, then destroys it, what was the reason for that prior to that destruction? I just don't see it. And I'm like, oh, I was really, really into this right up until this point. Because obviously it's an acceleration for the narrative to do something.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I feel like had this... Of course, we don't know how many other drafts and how many different versions of the script were going around, but I almost feel like that's something that could have, would have, should have been explored better in the first 3 acts, which is give Sisko a little more turmoil. Like, is this happening again, where I'm going to have visions again? Let the prophet show up again more than once at the beginning there. Let him actually struggle with it, so it's almost like, okay, is this real, or is this just madness coming on? I would have much preferred to have seen a bit of struggle there. Oh, I do love this little interplay here. Odo and Worf. Odo says, about leaving Kira behind to be possessed. I had to respect Kira's wishes. And Worf says, if it were Dax, I'm not sure I could have done the same. And Odo says, just be grateful you didn't have to make that choice.
Guess I didn't tell you that one story, right?
Yeah. Ooh. So funny thing about logs that get deleted or never get recorded to begin with, because, you know what, let's just skip it.
Remember that mission where we were the only 2 that went on it, and there was only 1 ship on the station, and then I had to do that thing that got me in trouble? Remember that one? No, I didn't tell you that? Forget it.
Yeah, don't worry about it. Yeah.
So when Kira emerged from the temple with, like, lightning sparking from her fingertips and stuff like that, I hate that I have to say it, but I have to bring this up. The only thing that really popped into my mind at that time was, there is no Kira, only Zool.
Yes.
I had to, because it's so strikingly comparative.
Yeah, love it.
Also, speaking of lightning, that Quark was trying to gin up some business because it's been a little slow recently at Quark's, but I guess that he's going to go into the lost column because a lot of his glassware was destroyed by random lightning.
That was a lot of glassware getting destroyed. I hope that they have some sort of like insurance replicator plan where you're just like, no, I lost 1,000 nice bottles. I need to now replicate all of that. Thank you very much.
And whatever liquid was in there, he probably lost maybe some Kanar. I hope Morn wasn't hurt. Maybe, I don't know, he was traumatized, so he won't speak for a while.
Yeah, good point.
I love the bit of trivia where you said that it was an option to have Kira and then Kai Winn embody the Wraith and the Prophet. But I really do like how Sirach kind of approached that little neck tilt, kind of like I'm cracking my neck, getting ready for action.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, and the way he was dressed, this isn't like couch fabric Jake anymore. This is like Jake is slick. He's built.
Yeah.
He looked like a gunslinger, right?
He did.
I was just waiting for like some Ennio Morricone music to start, scoring the scene.
That would have been awesome.
Okay, so one thing that really, really, really bugged me. I dig the reason why it had to happen, but how exactly does Kai Winn access the Chronoton panel in Ops? Because Aren't there like passwords and stuff?
That seems like a distinct oversight. That seems like something that Captain Sisko will have to have a talk with both Dax and Worf. And I'm like, is she gone? Is she gone? Okay, can you please turn on two-factor authentication?
Short version of the summary. For those who missed it, Kai Winn came in like a wrecking ball, and now you have that song in your head, and you're welcome.
We'll get right back to the reckoning, but first, a word and a thank you to all of our Patreon followers over at patreon.com/missionlog. You know, Norman, I really have to hand it to you and the rest of the team who have spearheaded our Discord. That is the most fun that I have on social media, day after day, week after week. We have an incredible community there. You really nailed it when you called it a community. There's a lot of Star Trek talk, but we talk about our other interests, talk about food because, hey, it's me. And I love the friendships that we have found online in the Mission Log Discord through Patreon.
Well, one of the things that we were looking at when it came to giving our supporters the robust amount of content that they deserve is this safe space where they can come together as a community of fans. And because of COVID, it helped us accelerate this program because not a lot of our fans were able to make it to conventions to see their friends in person. So we've been able to give everybody that is a supporter on Patreon the opportunity to at least stay in touch with everybody, to create new friends and to create new foundations for future friendships when we ever get a chance to see them again in person. So if that is all that we were able to bring so far to Patreon, I think that is something that we can be very proud of. But more so, we can be even more proud of the people who have brought such a positive energy to that community, and that is beyond our thanks.
But wait, there's so much more, because not only has that community building really taken off, you get a lot as a Patreon follower. You get the unedited, unexpurgated videos of our recording sessions. You get early access to the episodes, also the unedited, unexpurgated versions. And there's new merchandise going out. There is just so much happening at Patreon. It really is a direct link to us and a direct link to the show. And before we remind you again, patreon.com/missionlog, I want to say thank you to some of our newest patrons who have just recently signed up. There's Noam, Elizabeth, John, Mike, Jonathan, Benjamin, David, Terry, Deanne. Thank you all so much. It means the world to us to have you join us there.
Like John said, thank you everybody that has supported us, that have come on board, and of course thank you to everybody that has been supporting us since the very beginning. And if you would like to get more information on how to join the community, please visit patreon.com/missionlog. Again, that is patreon.com/missionlog.
All right, The Reckoning. You know, from the beginning, I mentioned that about the stone. Here's Sisko saying, well, the prophets want the stone here. And Winn saying, oh, how do you know? And Sisko saying, it's prophet stuff. You wouldn't understand because you don't talk to the prophets. You worship them, though, so I guess you just have to take my word for it because you worship them, and I'm the one talking to the prophets and you're not. I mean... Look,
snap.
Yeah, we're all in Sisko's camp here. We're all behind Sisko. Well, I mean, except for some of his more morally dubious choices. But at least in this instance, I'm on Sisko's side. But here again is the problem with just saying, well, it's God's will, if that's your excuse. I mean, also, I do have to think that because Sisko found it pretty easy to lie to the Romulans, it is now way easier for him to lie to Kai Winn. It's a good thing she doesn't know about that with the Romulans, because she'd just be like, oh, are you lying to me? Like you lied to Vreenak? So, and he does not have the upper hand anymore at all.
But the interesting thing is that in looking at that, in his behavior from In the Pale Moonlight to now, that is... he kind of leveled up, right? He learned a little bit. He has a little bit more experience in that kind of subterfuge. But here's the interesting thing about taking a religious high ground. It's that someone will claim it's the prophets or it's God's will in this case. But the other side of the equation will also take that same stance. Kai Winn always takes that stance, and now Sisko takes that stance. And Kai Winn said, well, I'm the spiritual leader of our people. And then Sisko will say, well, I'm the spiritual figurehead of our people. So they're literally on the same side when it comes to faith. But who is that faith serving?
Well, see, that's always the interesting dilemma about how faith works in cases like that, which is, sure, you could stack one religious tradition against another religious tradition and go, oh, okay, well, they have opposing views on things because they're coming from completely different traditions. But when it's internal, and so far we only know that the Bajorans just have one religion and essentially the same or similar set of beliefs. But within that, just like on Earth, you have people driven by ego, driven by personal gain, driven by political motivation, whatever, and all using that same excuse to get what they want. And I think that definitely is one of the most interesting things about having a character like Kai Winn, having some of the more benevolent representatives that we've met along the way, like Bareil, to kind of temper that, so we know that they're not all horrible.
Kaiopaka.
Kaiopaka. Go way back. Yeah, Kaiopaka is wonderful, and it still breaks my heart that she's still stuck on that planet where she can't come back and set things right. But yeah, I do think that's one of the more interesting, nuanced views that DS9 has about religion. It's not just about, well, let's explore what that faith is and where they got it right or where they got it wrong. It's the people who make it up and how do they either express or abuse that faith. And like you said, that is the central problem, is that when you say, well, we're just going to chalk it up to faith, you have no way to discern between one person and another who's telling the truth or who's got it accurate. You know?
Have you been reading my notes, John?
I haven't. This is all rattling around in my head. But here, I will come back to it because I want to add on to this. That we only got a hint of it at that conversation between Bashir and Odo, where they're, Quark's bringing them drinks, and Bashir says about prophecies, it's a tangle of vague contradictions, speaking specifically about Bajoran prophecies. And Odo's attitude is just prepare for the worst. That's, no matter what it is. And I get it. I definitely get Bashir's side on this, because prophecies are essentially useless unless they are unambiguous and not open to interpretation. A prophecy is just where, if you've got 10 different people who read 10 different things into it, it can no longer be considered a prophecy. It's just a thing that you interpret post hoc. So in that case, I will definitely side with Odo here, saying, well, you got to prepare for the worst. They are at war, and they need to be prepared for whatever happens, because clearly the prophets have taken an interest in that as well, ever since Sisko decided to involve the prophets in the war.
Right, and that goes back to what Odo was saying. It would be helpful if they would give us an actual plan, so we can understand what's going on, and then we can fulfill their needs as well as fulfilling our needs. But Kira says, well, that's what happens when you don't have faith, and Odo's like, okay, I guess, right?
Yeah. And I do, I'm going to point out the obvious here, but it's kind of fun, obvious to me, and that is that the reckoning in this story is the placeholder for what we might Earthbound call the rapture, depending on your faith tradition. And I have to admit that I take great pleasure in following the many, many predictions about the end of the world, because they are centered around prophecy and interpretation, which again is all vague. If you're keeping score at home, and I don't know if you are or not, so I'll help you out here, but if you're keeping score at home, and if you're not, literally none of them have ever come true.
Y2K didn't come through?
Yeah. Sorry. None of those. They didn't actually come true. Now, until one does, though, and at that point, we won't be here to talk about it. But you won't be here to listen to it either. So,
That's a shame.
So you're fine. You're fine. You can just live your life until that point. In this episode specifically, though, I have a hard time understanding the point of the battle between the Prophet and the Pa-Wraith. I mean, it's pretty isolated to the two of them. I mean, sure, they're interested in Bajoran. You've got earthquakes and floods happening down there, but it's about as consequential as two world armies doing battle over an anthill. This is really about them. And so far, if we're just sort of assuming, well, Sisko asked for a favor, so the favor we're going to ask back is that we're going to mess up the promenade deck by shooting lightning bolts at each other. I think Sisko still got the better part of the deal. Almost lost his son in the process, I get it, but he also had faith that the prophets would look out for him if it weren't for that meddling Kai Winn.
But this is our anthill, and these are our beans, John. It's worth fighting for.
Yes.
No, I understand what you're saying. And you know what? The strange thing is about, like I said, the interpretation of faith-based systems is that when you have a handful of people, especially a handful of people that have ulterior motives, then they will weaponize those faith-based systems or turn them into some type of industry that serves their purposes. I'll get that into a little bit. There is a little bit of a nice study of people that are supposed to act as you say and not as you do this time, as opposed to what you've said before is like do as you say instead of not as you do. So I've always believed, okay, so let me dial this back to a specific quote here. When Kira said to Sisko, she said, "The Kai is jealous of you and your relationship with the prophets. I'm a little envious myself." And Sisko says, "Why?" Kira says, "You speak with the prophets, they listen to you, that's a rare gift." And then Kira also says that, "I guess that's why I don't resent you, but the Kai does." She kind of bookends that with saying, "You defied the will of the prophets, and you did it because you couldn't understand the fact that the human and infidel had a stronger faith than you. The emissary was willing to sacrifice his own son to serve the prophets." We're getting into that Abraham and Isaac type of biblical story,
which by the way I have a huge problem with. But please go ahead.
But it's very similar to that.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then Kai Winn says, "My faith is as pure as the emissaries." And Kira says, "I think you're confusing faith with ambition." So it really kind of colors. Yeah. That was a great piece of writing, by the way. That is a great
piece of writing,
right?
Yeah.
And I think it does color this particular debate of spiritual leaders being leadership for people. But when you really think about it, they're just the same type with their own ambitions, but they also have human failings, just like all of us. They have envy, they have jealousy, they are self-serving in nature. When you have that kind of leadership that is covering their ulterior motives with this piety, then how do you really trust your own religious and spiritual leaders when they're using that for their own personal gain, right? Kai Winn said that she respects the emissary, but she goes behind his back and contacts the two highest level authorities over Sisko in this matter because her feelings were hurt.
Yeah.
Because she's not getting the way that she believes that she is entitled to.
Yeah.
A life of servitude, a life of service, a life of sacrifice. And all of a sudden this guy comes in and says, "I'm the emissary. I didn't want it, but hey, I got the role that you want." So who is this spiritual leader really serving anymore?
Well, see, and now you sort of set me up to drag out my humanistic soapbox, and I not nearly as big a soapbox as I've had in past episodes. It's okay. You don't have to
soapbox
fast.
Is getting a workout, man.
Don't have to fast forward through this. But no, you're right. I think what's important is that you look at something like that, and you first of all start by stripping away that layer of faith tradition or whatever, and you can look at individual human beings and say, well, people are capable of good behavior, bad behavior. People are capable of being motivated by good motivators or bad motivators, and some of those are entirely self-serving. Some of those are a little more altruistic and benevolent toward others. That exists regardless, wherever they're coming from. What gets really ugly is that then even when you have people who are motivated by the best of circumstances, motivated by the best of intentions for others, who maybe put that to work in a faith tradition, it then becomes very difficult to separate that out from people who are using the same language and abusing those faith traditions because they're motivated by other things. There's not an objective way to then come in and look at the two and go, oh, but wait, that one's doing it, that one is expressing it correctly because they said a certain number of faith-based words. That's absolutely where it becomes this ugly, very difficult problem, even for the people who have the absolute best of intentions and follow their hearts. Unfortunately, their hearts can lead them to some really unfortunate places here.
Well, I think sometimes, in the end, they just kind of they resign to the fact that they're only human. They get confused with certain human urges, certain human needs.
Yeah.
As much as their faith tries to purify them from that only goes so far. But I kind of wanted to switch something to a little bit more science fiction and philosophical.
All right.
So there is a certain logic, or a circular logic, that the prophets have when they brought their vision to Sisko. They say that, the Sisko of Bajor will not waver. He'll bring the reckoning. It will be the end or the beginning. It's very, very convoluted. But it's not something that's atypical of science fiction. So in science fiction, and especially, say, in Ron Moore's Battlestar Galactica, now Ron Moore being one of the principal writers, for Deep Space Nine, there is kind of like this axiom of all this has happened before and all this will happen again. That's kind of like what the prophets are getting at. So it begs the question here, and I'm getting very kind of Star Trek-y about this.
All right.
So have the wormhole aliens who exist outside of what we understand as linear space-time, if they in fact have given the Bajorans artifacts and orbs to help the Bajoran people and give them guidance and direction over thousands of years, millennia, if you want to call it that, is it possible that the prophets themselves are what the Bajorans will eventually become in their far future? So they will become incorporeal beings, much like we've seen in Star Trek, like the Metrons, or the providers in Gamma 2, the disembodied brains and gamesters of Triskelion, or the Q, right? Mm-hmm. Now they have the ability, these future incorporeal prophets who were once mortal Bajorans, now they have the ability to traverse space-time, go back in time, and guide the destinies of their primitive selves in order to secure their own future.
Yeah.
That's where I think that the possibility of this is going, because why would the prophets care?
Yeah.
If, in fact, they weren't protecting the evolution of their own people to get to becoming the prophets to start that cycle again.
I can see that. And I can see that being, it makes logical sense, although if they've gotten that far, it seems like they should be leaving themselves better clues. If they actually can traverse time and space as they do, they could actually be a little more clear about it. And I understand there's an argument to be made that, okay, well, we don't want to completely interfere with their free will, but, we could at least sort of lay out those guideposts in a little more clear way. I also think that if you were to take that out of the equation and say, well, they're not necessarily the evolved state of the Bajorans as we know them, I do want to think that as species evolve and can actually last that long, that they have lasted that long because they have a benevolent streak in them, or at least an altruistic streak, where they understand that their survival and their growth is as important as survival and growth of those around them. I think that's maybe a little more pleasant way to look at it than the other option, which is that it's just a science experiment for them. And they're just, that's the third option, is just that, they're basically growing this in a petri dish that we'll call Bajor.
That's the interesting thing about fixed faith-based systems that believe that fate has been predetermined.
Yeah.
Because if that's the case, then that everything that has... Let me back up for a second. Let me go kind of like Avengers storyline timeline here. If you take one of those infinity crystals out of the timeline it skews the timeline. Put it back, it restores the timeline. So everything that all of the Bajorans have learned up until the point where they pass that information on in whatever form, those prophets will know that that has happened. So when they go back to the past to preserve the present and the future, all of that has already been written.
Yeah.
So they actually know that they will have to create these esoteric riddles for Sisko and Kai Winn to solve because they already know what the outcome is. Why would they have interfered with destroying the army, the Dominion army in the first place if they didn't know how this outcome was going to be?
Exactly.
They already know what's going on.
Exactly.
Right? But the thing is that as audiences, as say like from Sisko's point of linear time and everyone else's point of linear time, since they're sharing that, they only see it from one dimension. But the prophets are playing it in, wait for this, John.
Yep.
3-dimensional chess.
Whoa, not chess, but in 3 dimensions?
In 3 dimensions.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, those wormhole aliens are pretty advanced then.
Another thing that I liked about this episode was the skepticism and a little bit of the irreverence that Bashir brought into the discussion about prophecy and religion.
Mm-hmm.
If you like I said, if you take score, if you're paying attention, Dax and Bashir, the 2 major science officers on the station, are very much against any of these faith-based systems, to the point where they are using science in order to stop these spiritual forces. And it's where Sisko and Kai Winn actually kind of create a small alliance, even temporarily, to protect the prophets for being able to do what they want to do.
Right.
But in the end, Kai Winn chooses science over faith. So there is a little bit of healthy skepticism, I think, involved in this episode where they're looking at science and faith as different and definitely opposite sides of the same coin.
Well, that goes back to what you were saying, particularly in the Kai Winn situation, is that, yes, I don't doubt that she has faith. Clearly, that is incredibly important to her, but she also has these personal motivations. And either way, she'll be able to make a faith-based argument for why she let her personal motivations win the day. I'm definitely Team Bashir in this. You know, that's the sort of my nature, is that I hear his argument, and that's what would come out of my mouth too, which is to say, well, no, if you're going to make this claim, you're going to make it based on a 30,000-year-old artifact about aliens who won't communicate with us directly, and the claims are purely open to interpretation, then you better have some other objective standard by which we can measure what's happening. You know, because
that was there too. I mean,
yeah.
You know, 100%. Shoving the wormhole aliens back at Sisko.
Yep.
And saying like, "Hey, remember when you were on board with that term?"
Yeah. And you can actually talk to them. Again, like, do we lose sight of this each time? Like, Sisko, you can actually talk to them. You could hop in a shuttle. You could just go into the wormhole and say, "Okay, look, you helped us with the invading army, which you already would have known about anyway. You already would have known that they were going to overtake Bajor anyway, because you can already tell the future, and supposedly you care about Bajor anyway. Can we at least talk about what's happening here?"
In my head canon, Sisko breaks the stone open outside his dad's restaurant in New Orleans. The life form inside takes over the tuba section of a passing Dixieland jazz band, and that's how you get to parades.
All right, Norman, here we are, standing at opposite ends of the promenade deck, staring each other down. The wind machines are blowing. This is where we end up, mano a mano, to decide if we like an episode of Star Trek or not, and then pick it apart for morals, meanings, messages. So as we do, I'm going to kick it over to you first to ask you, did the episode hold up for you? What do you think of it? And then we'll pick it apart for those 3 M's.
My child. Oh, John. Thank you for that wonderful setup. But I have to ask you, who was that setup for? Was that for me or was that for you? Really? Okay. Anyway, I know that.
It was for you. It was, in this case, for sure.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, the interesting thing is that I am mostly on board with this episode. I enjoy stories that posit the questions that need answering, but I like questions that are also really difficult to reconcile because those questions just inspire larger and more complicated answers to those questions that lead to even further questions. I love it when those things just cascade from one question to another question to another question. That means that we're not answering it specifically. We are, but we're also uncovering even more information, more truths about things that that may or may not have been discussed. So, Inquisition and the Pale Moonlight, the two episodes that we just recently covered, they're very straightforward. They're very dark.
Yeah.
They have a very specific narrative. We have expressed our opinions about those.
We had one or two comments about those. Sure, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to push that soapbox over to the side.
Right.
But I really do appreciate kind of like what the writers were doing here in Reckoning. I really enjoyed this power struggle between Sisko as the emissary and Kai Winn. And I said this before, and I'll say it again. I absolutely love the Kai Winn character. I love Louise Fletcher and her performance. I love the fact that when she comes on board, everyone's hairs collectively stand up on end. Mm-hmm. But the thing is that as performers, as actors, they have really found a wonderful acting cadence in their timing and how they react to each other. I think that is their relationship here is about as polished as I've ever seen it. But where this episode falls short for me, though, is the back end of the episode. I love this episode right up until the point where Sisko destroys the artifact. And it just seems that was written in to ramp up the tension in the story. It's very obvious. Like, the story was very philosophical, very, I guess, they tried to study the motivations of where Sisko was as the emissary, his struggle with it, Jake's struggle with his father, and then all of a sudden, I'm going to wake up and just be angry and destroy a 30,000-year-old artifact because. And that just kind of really just burst the bubble for me.
Yeah.
But I also think that the introduction of the Pa-Wraith was very interesting. I like the fact that there's this kind of Lucifer-esque kind of power out there in the universe. But I think that where this story could have really benefited from was actually being a two-parter. I think that if it were opened up to be a two-parter, it would have had the breathing room to explore a little bit more of why Sisko decided to do what he did. That should have been the end of the first part of the two-parter.
Interesting.
Him going to him going to Dax's station and destroying the artifact and letting these energies out. Why did they choose Kira? Why did they choose Jake? Obviously, they were there at the excavation site when they found that artifact, so it would have been interesting to explore a little bit more of their direction in the episode. Kira's faith and Jake's doubting, and why they were the perfect vessels for these two spiritual powers to be able to inhabit. I think that would have been really interesting. Yeah. So, I really, really do enjoy this episode quite a bit for the elements that it presents, but I just think that they crammed too much information and it was a little too ambitious for, 48, 49 minutes.
Hearing you say that kind of... It doesn't change my feeling about the episode, but I like what you said about really appreciating everything up until the point that he destroys the tablet. Because now in retrospect, I look at it and go, yeah, that's where I lost interest as well. Yes, there is an in-universe explanation. Okay, Sisko is being motivated by either the Pa-Wraith or the prophets or whatever. He feels compelled to do this. But I don't feel like that was an earned moment. So everything before that, yes, starts to build a much more interesting story. And maybe if that had been turned into a two-parter, as you suggest, that could have saved this episode some of the problems later. I will say this, I love how this episode lays bare some inherent problems with beliefs, some beliefs, using faith as an excuse. Winn and Sisko can both claim to do what's in the best interest of Bajor and what is the will of the prophets, but they are still influenced by emotion, professional political agendas, what have you. And that's the important part of the character study that's happening up until that point. What I do not love here, and pretty much ever, is stories about supernatural possessions that lead to our characters shooting energy balls out of their hands and staring intently through contact lenses and talking through a voice synthesizer. There's wind machines and screaming, and I just feel left out of it at that point. I'm no longer connected to the story. And I get it. It's a test of faith for people around, and we showed the difference between Sisko and Winn through that, which we honestly already knew. Fine. I just prefer a little more sci in my sci-fi. So this episode, where it winds up in Acts 4 and 5, is not for me. So, Captain's Log Supplemental, the spirits shot fireballs at each other, and that hurt some people, but here we are now, Jake's fine. End of episode. So, but look, that all said, I'm still very interested in Sisko's journey and in what statements DS9 is trying to make about religion and faith and duty and personal character and morality and values, etc. Honestly, that is great fodder for a show. This episode in particular, though, was not that. It was some quality bickering between Winn and Sisko, and some quality bickering between Winn and Kira. It just, when we get to that point of shooting fireballs at each other, it just feels like a longer diversion from the rest of the story. And I don't love that about this episode. And honestly, because of that, I feel like we covered the interesting stuff in the last segment. If we really want to pick apart the problem with using prophecy as a guide, the problem with using faith as, in many cases here, a cudgel, that's all interesting stuff to explore, but I don't think this episode, to me anyway, came down with the message. If I'm being cynical and I say, hey, look, always have a chronoton emitter to kill your gods when you need to, okay.
And no password security.
No, yeah, please, two-step verification, people. We've talked about that. And I'm just going to go back to a line that you pointed out before. This exchange between Kira and Winn, which I thought was great. Winn saying, my faith is as pure as the emissaries, and Kira saying, I think you're confusing faith with ambition. I'm glad that we both wrote down that little exchange of dialogue. I think that's really, if you were to just do an episode about that, I think I would be completely and 100% on board. It is Winn's perversion of faith that has gotten her to this point. And she isn't able to tell the difference between faith in those beliefs about her religious tradition and her actual personal ambitions, which seem to be wrapped up in ideas of power and jealousy and all these other things. She's such a good arguer, though, that she will lay waste to anybody who challenges her on it. So then, where do you land? Well, you land at a place that somebody like Bashir or me coming in saying, if we only had an objective standard where we could tell that what you're saying has some truth validity to it or not, then we'd be done. We'd be done with that part of the conversation. So that is interesting space to explore for me, for DS9, I hope for our listeners. But I think this episode, in its attempt to have a conversation about faith and belief and the perversion of that faith, ended up deciding, well, let's have special effects for the last act. and let's just stop there. Yeah. And I think that undermines the exploration here of those morals, meanings, messages. But I feel like you liked this episode a little bit more than I did, or at least the attempts that this episode was trying to make a little more than I did. So bring us home, Norman. What do you feel about the messages, morals, meanings in this?
Well, I mean, to enter this this final part of the podcast as kind of like a confessional, the Catholics know very well. And it's my Catholic upbringing that I think, and the shedding of that I think that I found very connective with this episode, because as a Catholic, as a former Catholic, or as a former belief systems supporter, in a way, the more that I study, the more I realize that, certain things in these belief systems just don't hold true for me anymore when I challenge those systems for myself and the powers that be. And it's because the interpretation of belief systems and the enigmatic path that we've created for these systems, how do I put it? How do I consolidate this in one idea? Faith is a very sharp, three-edged sword based on one's interpretation of the signs of that faith, or the converse interpretation of that same faith. And then there's that third edge, the actual truth of those signs and prophecies, and whether or not they hold or have any meaning at all if they were just left undiscovered and uninterpreted. So as a human race, and I think about this a lot, actually, having thought about a lot of Gene Roddenberry's quotations about humanity and the human race and moving forward into the future, we heap a lot of our own uncertainty and self-doubt about our existence, about our nature, about our reason for being, about our belief systems that are as endless as, say, the ocean or the horizon, because it's that infinite space where we feel that we aren't alone, and meaning that in somewhere in our nature there is, or several or hundreds of millions of people that are placing that very specific part of their existence in the hands of a power that is far greater than any individual person. And for many that can be comforting, that there is something in that infinite space that is connective at our most primal human level. It's a very basic and powerful need that we all need to be part of or tap into that's greater than ourselves. It's in this very philosophy where I find faith to be assuring or reassuring for those who need it, or for those who need it to get through the course of mundane existence. It's those who capture and mold the faith, this faith or that faith, into instruments of influence, of power, of control. This is where I come to a very specific and very cynical observation of faith. Very much like what Kai Winn is doing in this episode, or has done in her appearances. And this is where I believe that this is what is illustrated in this particular episode. Sisko is struggling with one aspect of his faith in the prophets, i.e. trying to interpret what they want from him. Kai Winn is struggling with why an outsider who hasn't served as faithfully as she has is the chosen of her gods. Kira is the one whose faith has placed her in the middle of this struggle because she leans and depends on her faith, not for power, not for influence, and not really for guidance for the most part, but to ground her in that world where everything is just unstable. So, in my final analysis, does faith manage the needs of the many, or the needs of the few? Or does it serve the needs or the will of the one? And it begs even more questions like this. Who gives that one person, or a collective of individuals, the right to interpret the faith for millions in a way that serves their needs and their purposes and focuses it into one direction, while there are maybe other, perhaps infinite, numbers of ways that these signs, these portents, these prophecies, these artifacts can be interpreted, because this is how mortal interpretations of experiences and their past influences help interpret these clues left behind in the past. And maybe if there were a more clear roadmap, like Odo said, maybe there would be a better way to interpret these faiths. But let's look at this realistically. These faith-based observations that have turned into influences, that have turned into these governing bodies of power, they're just basically made by somebody who basically found them, and at one point in time were written down by people who were asking themselves the same questions philosophically at one point in time, and just wrote those down for people to find, then interpret, then turn into these types of influences over the people that they have found that support that faith.
If only those wormhole aliens could just make it a little more clear for everybody. Wouldn't have that question. Mission Log is produced by Roddenberry Entertainment. Executive producer, Rod Roddenberry. Our website and your opportunity to comment and connect with us is missionlogpodcast.com. If you'd like to support Mission Log directly, you can do so at patreon.com/missionlog. And for more Star Trek news and discussion, be sure to visit trekmovie.com.
On the next Mission Log, Valiant.
Some of the music for Mission Log provided by Warp 11, online at warp11.com. Special thanks to consulting producers, Adam Brusky, Homer Frizzell, Mike Richards, and Mike Schabel. That showdown has to be one of the weirdest things that's happened on the Promenade. Well, maybe the weirdest thing since that emu showed up that one time. End transmission.
This is a Roddenberry podcast. For more great podcasts, visit podcast.roddenberry.com.